Well, good morning, everybody. On with digging ditches. Today is November 19th, exactly a week from today. No, hold on. Today's Wednesday, the 19th of November. Tomorrow is the 20th, and then a final week goes by, and it's suddenly Thanksgiving. I remember my grandfather saying to me, "Time just flies by as you get older, Logan." I never believed that because everything was torture to me sitting in the classroom watching, oh God, we're out of here at 5 of 3. Can we get out now? Well, wherever I was before, I'm going to continue like I have made copious notes. This crushed me as a condemnation began to come at me like a dark cloud. I fought back, assuring her that I could remarry. I must be telling Mary that. I had not initiated the divorce with Lee. She had divorced me. That gives me some grace. I had done everything in my power to prevent it. God would not condemn me to a life alone, would he? Mary soon calmed down, but in order to please her, because it's all about pleasing somebody, we went to see a priest to ask if he could marry us in a Catholic church. It is amazing how each one of us has an agenda for the other when we become spokesmen for God. Jackie and I sat in the office of the rector in the church. We told our long story to the priest as he sat listening. After about a half an hour, he suddenly looked at Jackie and told her that she needed to return to the Catholic Church. Well, a half an hour spent with this rector with a rectum up his ass. After all, let's see. After all, she had been born into that church, baptized into that church, and had strayed from that church. He let us know that she had been led astray, and that he had the authority to tell her this. He never even bothered to tell us that it would be impossible for him to marry a non-Catholic, especially a divorcee. We left very angry and confused. Were we really in God's will, or Rick Wilson's will, who she remarried to and is married to today, and he successfully stayed together with one woman? No, he worked for 51 years. I suppose he was in the union as a printer and had his own print shop. So he has recently been telling me everything you're watching and listening to and reading is BS. That's called projection. The person that projects to you that you're a BS artist usually is the BS artist. You know, if you point your finger at somebody, there's 3 fingers pointing back at you. So I'll repeat this again. It is amazing how each one of us has an agenda for the other when we become spokesmen for God. Jackie and I sat in the office of the rector in the church. We told our long story to the priest as he sat listening. About a half an hour. Blah, 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 blah. Right? So we left very angry and confused. Were we really in God's will? The crushing blow would come only weeks before we were to marry. My friend Tony, pastor of the First Baptist Church in Darien, had agreed to marry us in May as we had originally planned. He told me later that he had had reservations, but rationalized that a man could remarry under certain circumstances. He just was not certain which ones they were. Wow, let's see. 3 weeks before the big day, Tony went away to a big weekend teaching retreat. The seminar was full of fundamentalist teachings on divorce and remarriage. He called me in a somber tone and asked me if I would meet him for lunch. Then he dropped the bomb. As far as he could tell, my remarrying would create eternal adultery on my part. Eternity in adultery. Wow. No wonder I've had a lifetime of fighting off condemnation and guilt. And what Paul said when he struggled with all this in Romans, the 7th chapter, having declared what he declared in Romans 6:6, knowing this, that our old self was crucified with him in order that the body of sin might be done away with, so that we will no longer be slaves to sin. It's repeated in a different way in Corinthians. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. The life I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. The word I in that sentence is ego. If you're driven by your ego, you're insecure, and it's all about you. Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Christ, went to the cross to break and destroy your ego. Then he exchanged and took on all sin, gobbled it up, got beaten with 39, it wasn't just a whip, it was at the end of it, the cat of nine tails, ripped his skin right off. Passion of the Christ is the best movie ever made to really make you feel and just cry out and tears what Yeshua, what Jesus did for us. And it says in the scriptures, he was wounded for your transgressions. He was bruised for your iniquities. The chastisement of your peace was upon him, and by his stripes, those stripes, bam, 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 you are healed. Healed of what? Healed of your condition here on earth, being born into sin. Now that toxin is completely removed. If any man be in Christ, he's a new creation. Old things have passed away. Behold, all things become new. You are no longer a caterpillar struggling on the ground. You have now emerged. You have now re-emerged. You have been born again, and you are a metamorphosis has taken place, and you are a new creature, brand new human being. Most people go back to the patterns, though, of the way they always did everything, because they want to hold on to their fears, the unknown. And then they start dictating and telling everybody else how to run their lives. And they never think that they are the problem themselves. When you have the log in your eye and you're trying to take a speck out of somebody else's eye, you're a schizophrenic idiot on fire with yourself, and it's all about you. It took more than a week to shake that one when he told me that. As he was the answer. As Rick looked for help from Carl Stevens Bible Institute for someone to marry us. We had gone there looking for someone to oversee our fellowship and met with Carl Stevens. He gave us advice, but told us that unless we came under his direct leadership, he could not be responsible for us. Geez, another pyramid scheme? There, Rick had become friendly with one of the seminarians, Ken Alpern. Ken agreed to marry us. Phew! The condemnation began to subside, but would often rear its ugly head years later, especially after I had children. I would learn to walk through this condemnation as I later found out that the famous leader of the seminar that so influenced Tony had himself been caught in adultery. I felt vindicated. The wedding day was here, and this was to be the most sacred of occasions. Turning the page is not easy unless you spit in your hands. Jesus spit, on his hands, and then put the spittle and the little clay that he made into the eyes of the person that he prayed for. Why? Because we came from the dust of the earth, made clay. What's wrong with spittle? The wedding day was here, and this was to be the most sacred of occasions. We had readied ourselves for months in prayerful preparation. The whole fellowship would be there, and everything we did would be a Christian witness. Little did I know that my family had been gossiping behind my back about me and my house church cult. They snickered. This Rick Klimowski is no doctor. He has a PhD in engineering and works for Perkin-Elmer's. Who did they think they're fooling when they put doctor as the title text to his name? Logan is trying to make us think this is legitimate. Logan, the big liar. Oh, I wanted to prove to my family that I was not a crazy, loony Christian who refused to be normal. Why should I try to be normal? Huh? The ceremony, and that this ceremony was an opportunity to prove it, right? Let me straighten out the manuscript so I don't rip the page. But I learned that my brother-in-law had made an insensitive comment to all of them during the wedding. His comment would deeply affect me even as I tried to honeymoon after this terrible wounding. Jim Jones had just done his Kool-Aid thing that fall. His group of followers all condemned mass suicide by drinking a poison-laced beverage. After Rick went off on an unplanned tangent during the ceremony, we didn't know he was going to do this. Preaching before this captive audience. Nobody could get out of the church. Even Jackie's grandmother almost coughed to death, right during this whole thing. And it was a scene. I'm like, uh-oh, what's really going on here? This guy's got to quicken it up, and it's impossible for him to do that. After Rick went off on this unplanned tangent, preaching before this captive audience, my father sarcastically let out a disgusted groan. And boy, he could be loud. You think I'm loud? Thinking to ease the tension, my brother-in-law said to the rest of the family, when are they gonna pass the Kool-Aid? These remarks were said while we were hoping Rick would soon conclude. Mary was getting visibly disturbed and would not let us stay for the pictures at the church because we were now late for the reception. She could not believe what Rick had done. I thought this wedding was being attacked by the forces of evil. Rick was long-winded and he could be very dry, thinking everyone was enamored with him. That was okay. He loved us, right? Even though he took such liberty. His sincerity meant nothing to Mary, who saw his wordy message as an affront to her daughter's marriage. Great way to get off to a good marriage, right? Since all of my family was gathering at my brother's house, we stopped the next day, Jackie and I did, to visit. My aunt was trying to defend me to my brother, Peter. She had told him of our prayer meeting the night of the rehearsal dinner and how I cried out to God for a healing between us. He had mocked me for years, just as my father had. I wanted them to know of my newfound life. I was not in a cult. I was just trying to walk in God's will. I had to leave the painting partnership because Peter was of the world and I was in the kingdom. He needed Jesus. I had Jesus. He needed what I had to itch my back. Why did he hurl such insults at me? I had taken up with fellowship. I had taken up with the fellowship because I needed acceptance in a family. Little did I know. Little did I know. Little did I know that turning a page can be hard when you're trying to do this on your own. Elaine will be coming over soon, but I want to get this all done because this has been a project that's been going on for more than 30 years. Great. To write this thing perfectly, for people to understand what's going on, for it to become a bestseller, for it to become something that it will become at one point, even as a great movie. Who's going to play me? Maybe me. This offended my natural family. It's all about the natural family, right? Who may have perceived my actions as rejecting them. I was saying to them, watch me, this is how to live. But they were not going to see anything I did. They knew me, and they would show me their disapproval, as they always had. Peter was going to shove it back down my throat, and did so that afternoon, sending me off on my honeymoon, full of rejection, which Jackie could not understand. Her family dysfunction was different than mine. My family brutally tore into one another. She never understood this savagery. We would soon learn to live in isolation of one another's projected dysfunctions. We began our marriage with the fellowship in our home. Every week we would have services on Sunday nights. Big John stayed with us because I had asked him, but he did not like the direction we were going in. He sensed an obligation to play the guitar for us, but eventually made plans to move to California where Jody had moved. Eventually he met Jody's sister, became a full-time music director in his church there, and went through a long process of annulment for the sister before the church would allow them to marry. Well, you have to jump through hoops, right? The hoops we have to jump through. It would take years before I would understand who held those hoops in place. Jesus called them Pharisees. Pharisees, Lord Jesus, ruler of all nations. The fellowship kept growing as new faces appeared. One entire family joined our group. They were troubled teenagers. Tommy, Joanne, and Linda had all been abused by their alcoholic father, as had their mother, Bertha. After a service one night, Tommy stomped out of the house, violently took his shoe, and threw it against the outside wall of our condominium. I was able to get a hold of him as he burst into tears, explaining how violent his father had been. I assured him that I understood violent fathers, and he thanked me for being nice to him. Years later, Tommy would become a real adversary and influence when the group would turn on me. His ability in leadership was such that he could incite a lynch mob to start a hanging without leaving any fingerprints of his own on the rope. Yeah. Adversary. Yeah, I thought he was my friend. I'd been so nice to him. Look what he eventually did to me. One day, without Rick's approval, I asked JT's brother Steve, a carpenter, to build us a small lectern to fit in our home. I put it in a place for the Sunday night service, wanting it to be a surprise for Rick. He always came early to spend time in prayer with us, and that evening, as I excitedly watched him walk up the stairs and round the corner, his demeanor was anything but joyous. I was crushed as he told me that this would not do. It looked too formal. I would endure this pattern of oppression for several years. I remember calling Rick with the exciting news of Jackie's pregnancy. It was met with silence at the other end of the phone. He was able to muster up some approval, but it was obvious to me that something was awfully wrong with that response. Later, I understood that this was jealousy. Why would anybody be jealous of me? I suppose he felt threatened that Jackie was pregnant, and I wouldn't be sucking his, right? I won't say it. I'll let that be cleaned up by the typist who's typing. The relationship with Rick would continue in this manner. He was the elder statesman. I was the guy that always wanted to get going. JT and I would go to Rick's every week for leadership meetings and prayer as we continued to look for outside covering. We went to see Roy Bryant, spending a whole afternoon in his office, talking to him about our need. He told us how God had shown him why drinking wine was not for Christians. We left his place with that new revelation and thought we had advanced up the ladder of holiness. One more rung. He offered to oversee our group. Rick would be in contact with him. The relationship eventually fell apart because Roy never had time to visit us. He was a black guy. He was cool. Black Pentecostals have just as many problems. Let's see. The relationship eventually fell apart because Roy never had time to visit us. We kept searching. though we believed we needed to be under someone, or we might find ourselves in deception. Jackie and I found it difficult to live with any sense of privacy. People and their problems were constantly being dumped at our doorsteps. I was trying to serve as the Lord as a sold-out Christian, and this was the price. Rick would often recognize our need for privacy, but he never understood the real problems. He wanted to be the driver of this car, get all of the glory of being the daddy of the group without changing any of the diapers we had to change, and which were being strewn all over the place as all the members came to us with their problems. He had a very stern mother. His father had died when he was young. It had been his responsibility to take care of his wayward brother as he grew up. Apparently, his brother left him the responsibility of caring for their mother, severed ties, and had not spoken to him for years. Rick would often confess to us how overbearing his mother was, and we would attack in prayer the evil forces controlling him through her. She was the puppet master, as if he wasn't. It is funny how everything became an attack. We would build fortresses to ward off those attacks, blame the worldly people as pawns of Satan, come against them in our fears, and drive wedges in the name of Jesus. Then, when we were done with all that, we would attack one another, denying the attacks and labeling it as doctrinal disagreement. No wonder the world has a hard time seeing love in the church. Yesterday is today. You were running beautifully. Who was it that cut into our way and kept you from obeying the truth? Such persuasion never came from him, capital H-I-M, who called you. A little yeast will transform the whole dough. I guess I didn't put the reference to that in. Find it yourself, reader of and a watcher of this, or I'll find it later if it's necessary, because the person who's typing this right now said she'd do it, because she can type 120 words a minute. Who can still do that right now? Maybe at her age. I'm sure she'll get it back. Sometimes it's like riding a bike. You can never stop being able to do that. Maybe this exercise is how to write your autobiography in one easy step. The search continued as we tried to get ourselves under a covering. Our spiritual fathers and mentors, the Florida Five, as we referred to them, had convinced us through their teaching that submission to leadership was vital to prevent deception. After all, we were the new emerging church, free of the old doctrines that had plagued the denominational churches. This was the new hierarchy, pure with its teachings straight from the Bible, empowered by the gifts of the Spirit, and certain of its handle on the truth. Jackie and I went to Disney World in the spring of 1981, visiting my cousin Margie, who knew everything, and her husband Mark while we were in Florida. Mark worked for Derek Prince, the reason I owned every tape and book he ever distributed. I spoke to Mark about our dilemma at our fellowship. He suggested that I go directly to Jim Croft, Derek's right-hand man. Whoa! I'm going to the general's right-hand man? Whoa! Jim was the pastor of their church in Fort Lauderdale. I asked Mark if he would speak to Jim on my behalf. He did, and told me that Jim would be glad to help. Glad to help. Just call him when I go back home. I turned this information over to Rick, who I thought would be more credible than I. I wanted so desperately to make this connection. Through his Christian DJ friend Larry Black from Nashville, Rick had been pushing to approach Bob Mumford for covering. My information about Jim Croft prompted Rick to make the contact. Eventually, we returned to Florida where Rick and Jim met privately. Ooh, I wonder what went on in that room. Ah, circle jerkle? Who knows? Nothing is hidden from the Lord. And sometimes nothing's hidden from me. And the way I convey things, because people need to know the truth, and they need to know it the way it happened, even in the cleaning up of every human being on the planet. You can't hide nothing, baby. The connection was made. One of the emerging problems that began to grip me from this point on would become a reality as the fellowship continued to formalize. One summer, I rebelled against Rick, and he never let me live it down. He was used to order and the proper way one moves up the corporate ladder. The corporate ladder. The church has become a corporate ladder. Page 32. I'm making progress. He knew just how to make me feel, the right words to use to crush my attempts for independence from him. The leadership of this fellowship had been given to him by divine appointment, confirmed by his Christian friend Larry Black, and Rick's certainty, his certain all-knowing demeanor. I, after all, had never finished college, had been kicked out of military school, had managed to wiggle out of the Navy and get a honorable discharge, and never buckled down to taking orders from anybody. I was a rebel, and I'll never be any good. And I was trying to get this negative characteristic of mine under control. We had been saturated with teachings that convinced me rebelliousness was my problem. And we'd been told how the deceiver of the brethren, Satan, loved to delude the rebellious. I was a perfect pawn to keep it in check. Rick and Jim became fast friends. Yes, who could jerk off? I'm sorry, did I say that? The fastest. Rick and Jim became fast friends. A single man with few expenses, Rick was relatively wealthy. So his donations to Jim's church were sizable, to say the least. Jim flew to Connecticut one winter weekend to minister to all of us. The place was packed. We picked him up at the airport. En route, the car broke down. Our faith and mission were not hampered, though, as we stuck out a thumb and got the first ride all the way to Dick and Judy's house. Whoa, we hitchhiked. I don't remember that. What a divine moment. Our fellowship was starting to turn into a church. A real church. Whoa! Lots of healing went on that week, and the deliverance ministry was not new, but people's legs got lengthened. I forgot we were doing that. You know, they put themselves in chairs, and suddenly they'd see the one leg becoming equal to the next leg. Who knows if there was some funny business going on there. The deliverance ministry was not new. It sounds strange, but Jim and Derek would sit people down in a chair and pray for uneven legs to become even. I watched a leg grow an extra inch right in front of my eyes. That was pretty cool. I don't know how they would have done that. Fake that one. In another instance, my mother had a case of phlebitis causing poor circulation in her leg. She claimed she felt a warmth enter her leg after they prayed for her. A week later, she was examined by her doctor, who told her that her circulation seemed to be improving. Imagine that. Healings. Where did those come from? Oh, they stopped happening when the Bible was written. Then the Bible became God. People were slain in the spirit, and attendants dressed in white caught them as they fell. Blankets were provided to cover the legs of the women as they lay on the floor. Buckets were used for those people delivered from demons, as a brown spittle often accompanied coughing and gagging as the demons were cast out. Get out of here! Someone unfamiliar with these practices would have thought that this was a circus instead of the commonplace occurrences of a full gospel church operating in all the gifts of the Spirit. Many of the same people who always went up for deliverance did so again that evening. For years it seemed that the same people came up for prayer, and the same demons seemed to manifest themselves. We would fast and pray over them, but their problems never seemed to go away. I was often the recipient of many of their problems, having to listen to the same problems over and over again, never finding resolution. It took its toll on me. Rick, though, the leader, was often distant from these everyday problems. Here I am, doing all the work, and he's trying to get all the credit. Working my butt off, fasting. One time I fasted for 7 straight days. Try that, kids. Jim recognized Rick as holding the prominent position, though, and recognized me as a secondary role under Rick. This became the proper chain of command. Even though JT and I had led many of the fellowship to the Lord, baptized many of them, and had them through my home for years, I had to submit to Rick's leadership. That is why when I went to see Jim privately in 1982 about Rick's leadership action was taken later to remove the growing cancer. Me. Jeez. We all traveled to Israel with Derek in 1981 for the Feast of Tabernacles celebration. Rick, Larry, Jim, and many important leaders from the church in Florida were in this traveling group together, and a big fat guy from India called Mahesh Shabda. A bunch of crap. All of them getting rich for years. Some of them are alive today still. I was a privileged young emerging leader among some of the world's renowned men of God. At the time, this rebel Logan now is under control. Yippee! Yippee-yi-yay! Here, do the math from 1981. Let's see, 19 and 25. That's a while ago. About 44 years ago. On the way to the airport, Jackie told me that the fellowship had wanted to provide money for her to go. For her to go too, but Rick had prevented it. Huh? I later found out that Rick had intervened, stopping Dick and Judy from donating the bulk of the money. They had wanted to surprise me. I was very upset and let Rick know in Christian terms, that is, with veiled anger. I held in most of the anger and forgave him by the time we arrived in Israel, but this issue became the straw that broke the camel's back when I later confronted him with the new information I'd learned of in his direct involvement in preventing Jackie from going. We were making connections with more leaders in this movement. In Washington, where we had attended a leadership conference, we met with a pastor from a church located 30 minutes from north of Ridgefield. Not too far from Sandy Hook, where that kid went cuckoo and shot all those little elementary children. I became comfortable with this man and asked Jim if I could submit myself to his leadership. Reluctantly, he agreed, but experience with submission under 2 different leaders often led to problems. I had to do something to get out from under Rick, though. Even during my sermons, I could feel his approval or disapproval. Under Rick's guidance, we became a non-profit corporation. We outgrew the room over the garage and rented the Lutheran church in town for evening services. We also received our new name, Mount Zion Covenant Church. All of this formalization was accomplished through Rick. The services were beginning to grow as we opened our fellowship to the public. Amazing. After John left us, I had become the music minister. Big John leaves, and I pick up from there. I learned how to play the guitar. Learning some basic chords on the guitar, I had learned how to lead worship in the Spirit, and we would often blast off into praise and dancing to sounds of joy produced by a number of us on different instruments. One of the new young members, Tad Alton, played the bongos. Tad became a painter working for me, and would eventually marry Linda McIntyre from that family that had been, everybody had, participated. They were, three of them born to the same parent at the same time, triplets. So he's now married to Linda, another member of the fellowship. My confrontation with Rick would happen that spring, the spring of 1982, when I would challenge him over the Israel incident. That would initiate the process for him to get rid of me. My Christian life, as I had known it, would never be the same. The impeachment, the fiery trial, which is to try you. Jim Croft visited us the spring of 1982, spending a lot of private time with Rick and his dick. And staying at Rick's house that weekend, the two of them. Apparently, they planned what to do if I became more troublesome. One evening, I finally confronted Rick with what he had done to prevent Jackie from going to Israel. He calmly listened to how upset I was, but never responded to anything. I said, he then went to Jim, telling him how out of control I'd been. During the week that went by, I felt guilty for my anger and apologized. I'm so sorry for challenging him. Yet, ending this rebellion took greater precedence over granting me forgiveness. Rick informed me that Jim was sending an emissary from Florida and asked if I would meet with them at the church that week. Fear gripped me as I called JT to be with me for support. He was the only person in our church who knew all the facts, but they would not let him in the meeting. I was offered three choices: submit myself to Rick's authority, offer the congregation an opportunity to choose between us, or go quietly. I chose the latter. I promised to remain quiet about our leaving and the reason we were going. Furthermore, if anyone asked about our departure, I agreed to say that Jackie and I needed some time off. I kept that promise until I learned the church members were being warned to stay away from me. That was more than I could bear. I began to tell my version of the story to whomever would listen. Few would, as I watched people avoid me like I was a man with a plague. Later, I was shocked to find out that Rick was systematically preaching about people who were deceived by rebellion. So I sneaked into one of the services to confirm what I had been told. His sermon was about Judas's betrayal of his friendship with Jesus. Oh, geez, now I remember that. Ending with Jesus hanging himself. I knew he was talking about me. When the sermon was over, I cried out in an unknown tongue in agony like I had never before experienced. There was total silence. Rick quickly gave a theological explanation about the emotions and misguided tongues. I sat there in silence, knowing that he was trying to maintain control and lead everyone to believe that it was just a fleshly act on my part. I had such a sense of the fear of God upon me as of an all-consuming fire. This expression was so overwhelming that I wanted to beg Rick to consider what he was doing. However, I remained silent, knowing that he deemed me to be a traitor, and the spiritual leaders to whom he gave such credence considered me to be totally deceived. Rick continued the service, and Jackie and I slipped out the back door not to disturb this unreal drama. 5 years later, Rick mysteriously died in a chemical accident at his house. I was never able to find out any more about his death. That day he preached about Judas, and I spoke in an urgent tongue that would flood my memory whenever I would think of his death. God can be an awesome consuming fire as well as a soothing balm, BALM. That was a hard year, not knowing God's will. Was it true? Was I deceived as the leaders believed? The weight of this question became the hardest obstacle to overcome. The following year, the audio tape, Why Jesus Would Not Sign a Commitment Card, found its way into my hands. The title of the tape was most provocative, since that's exactly what I had been taught to do by the very men who claimed to represent what Jesus himself taught. But this man and his message would set me free. Oh, a hard rain is going to fall. As the rain and the snow come down from heaven and do not return to it without watering the earth and making it bud and flourish so that it yields seed for the sower and bread for the eater, so is my word that goes out from my mouth. It will not return to me empty, but will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I sent it. 1982 was a year of disillusion. I remember crying one morning from the pain of rejection and what seemed to be such unjust treatment. I was sitting at the end of the bed. Oh, I remember this. This might make me cry. With Jackie, when Jessica, who was not 3, looked up at me and said, "What's wrong, Daddy?" And I could hardly say, "The people of the church have made Daddy sad." What an understatement. I was experiencing every emotion that could be described. I had lost direction and my purpose. My reason for being, to live my life for the Lord, had been removed, and I was as lost as anyone could be. Joshua was born that September, and I witnessed his birth. I know that fathers today are supposed to show caring and sensitivity during this process, but I found it gruesome. In what seemed to be a very rough procedure, the doctor turned Joshua's head in order to turn his shoulders. I thought the doctor was going to take the baby's head off. That was it. With all the afterbirth, I was cured from wanting to participate in that miracle. I had a boy. After he was cleaned up and lying on his mother's stomach, I was brought back to my senses. People from the fellowship visited us at the hospital. I wanted to engage many of them in what had happened to us in the fellowship and how unfair it was. The tension was always there. The paranoia seemed to dominate. I had been one of their spiritual leaders, and now I was trying to convince them that the shepherding movement was wrong. All of the years of teaching and convincing, I was now trying to erase. Many of them had looked to me for all the answers, and 6 months later, when the fellowship finally fell apart, they blamed me. I could never understand why someone would blame me for something I tried to warn people about. Just because I had been a part of the leadership, couldn't they see what the policies and doctrines had done to me? Could they not see that I had stood up against the bullies? Why was I not welcomed as a hero? Instead, I was shunned and blamed for having misled these poor lost sheep. Many started attending other churches, leaving me with a label of disdain. I remember a childhood incident that will always be with me. When I was only about 5 years old, I was playing in the sandbox, minding my own business. Suddenly, some of the neighborhood kids came flying around the corner, warning me to run because Johnny had a rock and he was mad at his brother. Well, that did not faze me, so I continued to play. Because I wasn't part of that, was I? Why would I run? I was not Johnny's brother. He wasn't mad at me. Suddenly, Johnny appeared, looked at me, and seeing all the other kids were too far away, proceeded to throw the rock at me. I think I remember him hitting me in the head, drawing blood and tears. I ran inside the house for protection, never understanding the consequences of being the recipient of someone's need to inflict pain on an innocent victim in order to satisfy misplaced emotional aggression. Over the years, I've come to learn that in general, people do not want to take responsibility for their own lives. Most are content having someone else make their decisions for them. Churches are full of people who listen to sermons every Sunday. Sometimes they are inspired, other times they are chastised. Whichever it is, they are recipients of instruction that contribute to their losing their God-given ability to creatively be free. If it was anger that drove the young child to throw a rock at his brother, I became the recipient of that anger merely because it was convenient for the little boy. The same was true years later when the fellowship needed to vent its anger. In psychological terms, this is called projection. They needed a scapegoat, just as Johnny needed a scapegoat. I was learning to be that scapegoat, and I would fight it to the bitter end. The bitter end would be the cross I would bear. As 1983 approached, I was able to get some satisfaction that there was still a Christian message somewhere out there. My brother had hooked me up with a Christian radio program in New York, and the host, Wayne Monblow, gave a few messages that were comforting. He emphasized the grace of God and often spoke of how Jesus went against the grain of the religious leaders of his time. Hearing this helped me to understand that I, as an individual, did not need teachers to help me grow in the Lord. I was beginning to believe that my heart could be comforted and led by Holy Spirit. In fact, I was led to listen to an associate of Wayne's, Dr. Bruce Morgan. My brother had one of his tapes, Why Jesus Would Not Sign a Commitment Card. This caught my eye because of the years I had spent in commitment thinking and covenant group mentality. This title embodied the essence of what set Jesus apart from established traditions. Let your yes be yes, he said, meaning the vow of commitment was more than God ever intended. My experience with being a committed Christian would change in concept as I began to understand how Jesus himself would not condone this trap set by man. This would begin my journey to real freedom as I listened to Bruce explain how Jesus entrusted himself to no man, for he knew what was in man. John 2:24 and 25. I'm going to bring it to a halt now. It's now page 40. I'm almost halfway through this manuscript. I think there's 117 pages. This is going to be a really good book. Reading it myself, I'm getting it into some insight about my own life, and all this happened in the 1980s. That's a long time ago. I've been through a whole lot more. Bye-bye, everybody. I met a man named Rungle. I met him in the jungle. The moon was bright. It was a Saturday night. Hey, everybody, let's Rungle tonight. Bye-bye.